Good afternoon and welcome to this occasional lecture by Sanjoy Hazarika. He's going to speak on the NRC and the Citizenship Amendment Bill. Sanjoy Hazarika has been an old friend of APU. He has visited us on several occasions for a public lecture, colloquium, as well as screening of his documentary films. He is presently the director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which is an independent, non-partisan international NGO based in New Delhi. It works on the realization of human rights across the Commonwealth. He is also the managing trustee of the CNES, which has pioneered the port clinics in Assam. He was the founding director of the Center for Northeastern Studies at Jamia, and where he also held the Saifuddin Kitchlew Chair. He is an author of critically acclaimed works on Northeast, including Strangers, No More Strangers Missed, and Rites of Passage. My own work on Northeast in a way began with his book Strangers Missed. He has reported for the New York Times from South Asia, and he was the consulting editor for Statesman and the Sunday Guardian as well. He has made a number of documentaries on the Northeast, including the latest one, Rambuai on Mizoram, which is screened at APU. Sanjoy Hazarika has served as the member of the executive councils of several universities in India, including NEHU and Nagaland University and IIM Shillong. As I said earlier, he's going to speak on an issue which has engaged most of us for quite some time. I'd welcome him to come and give this talk.
Thank you, Vikas, for that introduction. I always think that introductions are too long. Often they should be, sometimes they become as long as what a person seeks to speak. I thank you all for coming in after the fire drill, and at least you didn't have to walk up 10 floors. But Vikas, my old and dear friend, who's invited me to share some of my thoughts on yet another topic that has caused turmoil in the Northeast. Confusion in many parts of India, deep anxieties on the part of minority groups, both religious and linguistic, and raised the specter of statelessness for a large number of people. I'd also appreciate Nazrul, who is here, and where is he? And helped print out this talk, so I'm here before you, courtesy Nazrul. Chandan Gowda and Manu Joseph, I don't think he's here. Dr. Himanshu Upadhyay, Dr. Giridhar, Sharda Prasad, and Dr. Sudhir Krishnaswamy. Now the issue of the title is the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Bill 2016 through the lens of India's obligations under international human rights law and its own constitutional laws. This is also an issue that has drawn the attention of the international community, with leaders from the UN and especially the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Special Rapporteurs on Special Freedoms, including religion, assembly and speech, as well as international media and civil society. Some in civil society, international groups such as the Minority Rights Group have even raised the issue as recently as last month at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So I've divided my conversation into three parts. I will take a personal narrative, a kind of deep dive into the issue. I'll review the background and trajectory of the concerns, not just in terms of politics, but the contemporary history of the region, before looking finally at international and constitutional obligations. But just before I get into this deep dive, what are these two things, And I'll start with the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which CAB for short, which sought to extend the window of opportunity for non-Muslim illegal migrants to India to 2014. It lapsed in the Rajya Sabha as Parliament adjourned for the elections. A sigh of relief went up from the region, only to be met with the firm affirmation by several central government and BJP leaders that if returned to power, they would push it through anyway through Parliament. This, despite the fact that the move ran into a storm of protests in Assam and most northeastern states, and the idea of, and not realizing that the idea of manufactured consent, a long tradition in Indian political processes, had run afoul of public discontent and placed the BJP on the back foot in a region that it had virtually conquered between 2016 and 2018. The tiny states of the borderlands of India's east, the Davids, had put the Goliath of the country's politics on notice with a carefully aimed slingshot that stung the giant. Opposition from within the party emerged in the state, and the BJP was damaged by outspoken anger from its ally, the Assam Gana Parishad, which even quit the coalition in the state, saying it was undercutting the Assam Accord, which is seen as the consensual bedrock upon which Assam's complex politics is anchored. In Meghalaya and Nagaland, where the BJP is a small ally to larger regional satraps, Delhi has been censored for not taking the concerns on board. And in Manipur, the BJP chief minister has said his government does not want the law in the state, while the partner organization, coalition partner in Tripura, the Indigenous People's Front, said it would withdraw support from the coalition if it was implemented. So how will the turmoil, to look at something just a month away, affect the BJP's performance in the Northeast? It may not, but we'll get into that perhaps in the question and answer session. Particularly after, the AJP, with having quit in a flurry of melodrama and nationalist rhetoric, it jumped back onto the BJP ship. But first, a bit of history and context. So we locate the homeland and issues in the sharp teacher to whom few of us pay attention: history. Always to regret, always too late. One is the location of the narrative. Today, the conditions around us, not just in Assam, but elsewhere, make us remember Edmund Burke. It is 330 years almost to the day that Burke proclaimed those magical, stirring words as he sought to impeach Warren Hastings, Governor General of the East India Company and of India, representative of the British Empire for corruption and misgovernance. An event has happened on which it is difficult to speak, but impossible to be silent. In the case of Assam, it is not whether the event has happened, is destined to happen, or is in the process of happening. For much has happened over the past decades that should make us sit up and take cognizance of the conditions around us. I would like to reflect a little on the National Register of Citizens and a flight of imagination, as it were, on the legacy data, and what about those who cannot prove the legacy to 1951 and before. As you're aware, the National Register of Citizens of Assam insists on what you call your lineage. You must prove your lineage, that your family was there in 1951. And for others, they need to also prove that they were there pre-71. And we'll go into why these 2 dates, 2 years, are important a bit later. You have a situation where people are summoned to prove their identity at various units, because often different families give the same name of an ancestor. Imagination is deeply rooted in memory, and that's a fickle thing. We remember what we think we remember, but our remembrance of an event yesterday, even of lunch today, is different to our memory of it now. It will change tomorrow, embellished or reduced by the things we like about that memory and those memories of the incident which we seek to remember. As I speak, just think about lunch. What do you remember of it? What was good? What wasn't? Was it the same old thing? Was the rasam better than yesterday? I'm a writer and a storyteller. I work on issues of rights, of health and governance. And like all of you here, I research and document, not as well as many of you do. I spend time in the field. I make films, documentary films on issues I'm interested in, so that what people say and their memory of what they say and their experience remains embedded in one place for as long as we can retain it. Many perceptions are shaped by many experiences, and we've seen just now that the different competing groups of the Northeast perhaps may be strangers to each other, but we are no strangers to history, for history is a close and at times a terrible and unforgiving companion. How are outsiders perceived in the region? Those inside a particular area perhaps believe that they are privy to special information. Those outside are the Bahira Manu, or the outside people. And let me share a story from 300 odd years ago when the Mughals came to Assam to fight the Ahom kingdom. It had a Persian chronicler, and his name was Shahabuddin Talish. And although Talish talked extensively of the courage and tenacity of the opponent, he also said this about Assam: it is another world, another people, other customs. Its land is not like our land. Its sky is not like our sky. Its sky sends rain down without the originating cause of clouds. On its ground, the green grass sprouts up without any aid from the soil. Its rivers are deep, like the thoughts of a wise man. He wasn't being gender friendly, but I'm not going to apologize for that. So from times past, we've been on the outside. But we have our own vocabulary too in the region. For those we regard as the outsiders, who in places like perhaps UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, even Karnataka, may be seen as the Mukhya Dhara, the mainstream. So you have Vais, who is an outsider in Mizoram, a Vai, a Bongal in Ohomia, Assamese, the Khar in Khasi, Bahira Manu, also in Nagamese. Often these words are also directed by communities at each other. Move to the 19th century and the coming of the British Empire to the lands of the Nagas, Mizos, Manipuris and Assam, apart from the Khasi, Garo and Jaintia. The British colonial adventure, as you know, was essentially one of commerce and expansion. They defined several of these areas as excluded or partially excluded and brought in laws to enforce distance between hills and plains. So colonial law created one set of divisions. It's not that the hills and plains were particularly well connected, but they had barter agreements, trading posts, and huts, markets, which were established at regular intervals. Some of these, in fact, attracted traders from as far away as Tibet and Bhutan. All this existed before the British, who created the Chin Hills Regulation Act, I think it is 1873, and brought in a system of permits for outsiders beyond the area. So today, even today, 140 odd years after that act, we need permits to conduct business, visit and travel within areas such as the Naga and the Mizo Hills. There are, this permit, the inner line permit, as it is called, is enforced in 3 states of the region, and there are efforts to make it law in Manipur and occasionally in Meghalaya. So colonial law is still the basis of defining the outsider, one who cannot settle, although there are no restriction on individuals of any of these states from moving, settling, living in any other part of India as part of their rights. So colonial laws divide a country, and although they have divided people from each other and created separate nations, there is also a quiet flexibility within the Indian state that recognizes the fungibility of borders. But how is an outsider defined? Is it by law and citizenship? Is it by ethnography, economy, sociological and political norms? Or is it also by appearance? Northeasterners in Delhi and other metros. By circumstance and increasing by the nazar, the gaze, that is stamped in the eyes of the beholder. And that gaze which says, this is what I think you are, whether you like it or not, and that's the place you belong, and the place I locate and place you. And the nazar of the outsider who passes judgment on people he or she does not understand by colonial administrators and anthropologists and edicts. My first book on the region was called Strangers of the Mist. Today, we have strangers in our midst. And the latest book, just to confuse you, is called Strangers No More. The story of the stranger has evolved despite the age in which we live, of interlinkages, interconnectivity, of big brother watching, and it's possible for anyone to watch, stalk, and harm with recklessness, unmindful of the consequences. We face hop. We take an eye blink to decide who belongs and who doesn't. I go back 36 years ago. We've done 300 years with Edmund Burke. We've looked at Shahabuddin Talish. And I want to go to 1983. It's a time when no one seems to remember, and which appears to be wrapped in a resolute silence. If we are to understand what's happening today in Assam, and I hope it does not spread to other parts of the country, then we need to hark back to then, and even earlier perhaps. 84, of course, you would all know. Any students? Why is 84 important? CHRIs. There were three or four things which really happened in a very big way in 84. CHRIs was one. What? Don't tell me your reading of contemporary history is knowledge. The CHRIs for the murder of the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. And that was preceded by the storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And in December, you had the Bhopal gas disaster. So it was not a good year for India. Much has been written about those terrible times, but we've forgotten our own history of 83. Between the 50s and 70s, when Congress rule was unchallenged in Assam, victory after victory, majority after majority, there seemed to be a social or political contract between the party and Muslim settlers of Bengali origin who had been streaming into the valley since the early part of the 20th century. Not new, 20th century, early part. Settle the land, we'll get you the papers, produce crops, and vote for us. The signal may have come from the political class, but those who implemented the idea, did the work, were the revenue staff, who did the measuring and the weighing, the bargaining and settling, and who were paid for their work of enablement. And in 1985, there was what's called the Assam Accord. Am I stepping a bit beyond the narrative? No, because I want to use 85 to explain what happened in 83. The 85 Assam Accord is important because it was an effort to calm a movement against illegal migration that had erupted in Assam, in the Assam Valley, in bloodshed and confrontation, taking thousands of lives between 79 and 85. No one really knows how many died. But be sure it was one of the bloodiest periods of India's post-independence history. The peak of the violence took place in the February elections of 1983 to the State Assembly and to pick candidates to the Lok Sabha, whose elections were blocked by protests by the students and agitators in 1980. The toll for a week of mayhem is not less than 3,000. And the upper level, according to a senior intelligence officer I talked to afterwards, could be 3 times higher. The scale of the deaths can be assessed from the fact that in one place alone, called Nelly, although several villages were named, this Nelly was the name of the town on the highway, 1,753 people were killed in the space of 6 hours. In one area alone, spread over paddy fields. As a reporter for the New York Times, I covered those terrible days in Assam, and they've left a lasting impression on my life. Because it was an area through which we passed as school children to go home to our grandparents' place from the hills town of Shillong. When you see families laid out, bodies of families laid out in front of you, and you see that went across a stream and then walk up a ditch, the bank of the stream. And the first thing that I got to the stream and I nearly stumbled was this family laid out, and the youngest is an entire family, and the youngest was an infant which could not have been more than a month or two, whose head was separated from the body. So it does something to you. And my own daughter had not been born at the time, and perhaps I decided subconsciously that I would do all I could to help, not harm, since then, to explain conditions and situations and to create better understanding. And today's conversation with you is part of that journey. What was the movement about, which came from 79 till 85, and still which creates ripples and shakes on the ground in Assam and other parts of the region? It was about detecting and deporting alleged aliens from the state. Aliens were not from any planet, obviously, but presumed to have come from the neighboring country, Bangladesh. But Bangladesh, as we all know, was created in 1971 after, again I'll ask a question, what happened in 71? How did Bangladesh come into being? Anybody? What happened in 71? How did Bangladesh come about? India, Pakistan, which led to the destruction of Pakistan as 2 units became 1 unit, because Bangladesh, through the Indian Army intervention and the Mukti Bahini, was formed out of East Pakistan. But why did the Indian government intervene in East Pakistan? Anyone?
Maybe because of the number of the refugees that are coming to the India is huge.
it was about 9 million refugees had come, and there were both Muslims and Hindus. In fact, in the first 5 million who came, about 80% were Hindus. And about 1 million people had been massacred by the Pakistani army. There's pogroms. They tried to destroy the entire intelligentsia, university professors, student leaders, a lot. And there's an account of about 3 million women who were raped or sexually assaulted. Until today, there's an organization in Bangladesh which is demanding an apology from Pakistan for the war crimes. That apology has not been given, but that's a different story. So many of those refugees went back, but the person who ran the refugee camps, Colonel Luther, in his notes, which I have a copy, I have his notebooks actually, indicates that about 1 million stayed on in India. Approximately about 1 million, most of them in West Bengal, and some in Assam and Meghalaya. But the 1985 Accord tried to settle this very troubling period in the history of our country and in the history of Assam. And it said it was a tripartite agreement between Rajiv Gandhi's government on one side, the Assam government, and the All Assam Students Union on the other, which said that essentially that all Bangladeshis, all aliens who came after March 1971, which is when Bangladesh was created, would be detected, their names would be deleted from electoral rolls, and they would be deported. It didn't say which religion. That was not an issue. So this I place before you because it's important to understand a very complex issue and region, bound up in its own contradictions and histories, not in the binaries that political parties, leaders, and media have located it. Now, you have a process of detecting so-called illegal migrants in Assam. One of the reasons for the Assam Accord was, one of the things it set out was how these would be essentially detected. And there were tribunals which are set up, which are to detect illegal migrants. But that was working very, very slowly. And to cut a long story short, there were approximately, I think, 40 or so tribunals which were working at various times from 83 onwards. The total number of people who'd been processed through that was about 25 or 30,000. And there was a basic problem with the Assam Accord and with all the narratives that exist about the issue of detection and deportation from Assam. Deportation presumes that there is a receiving country. Bangladesh has always said there's not a single Bangladeshi in India. So where are you going to send them to? And this is an issue that nobody seems to have taken on firmly. Everybody talks in the Hawa about deporting. I'll come back to that again a bit later. So the NRC, which I talked about briefly, was essentially aimed at picking out non-citizens. And in June, July of last year, there was quite a lot of turmoil because 40 lakh people were left out of the NRC process. So everybody said, these are all Bangladeshis, these are all foreigners, forgetting the fact that there are large numbers of Bengali-speaking Muslims who are not Bangladeshis. Bengali-speaking Hindus who are not Bangladeshi. And the figures included tribals as well. So you had 4 million then, and everybody went to town. The UN special rapporteurs went to town on this, saying that this is terrible. Amnesty issued a statement. I think Minority Rights Group, everybody who was in the human rights field in this country and outside raised, made a statement or issued a concern. What many don't know is that 3.8 million people, that's 38 lakh people, have filed their claims for inclusion in the rolls. So that leaves 200,000 people out. According to officials, there are something like 8 lakh Bengali Hindus who migrated before 2014, and I'll come to why 2014, who may not make the final cut. And that's where the concern and resistance of local communities needs to be seen. As I said, there's a foreigners tribunal. There are many structural problems with the foreigners tribunal. There's what's called the D-voter, the doubtful voter process. So somebody can say that this is a doubtful voter, which means this person may not be a citizen and may not be allowed to, should not be allowed to vote. And to complicate it further, you have the NRC. And the D-voter process is mandated by the Election Commission since 1997 to weed out suspected foreigners from electoral rolls. And in 20 years, there are 120,000 D-voters. So you have D-voters, you have illegal migrants, you have suspected illegal migrants, you have people who can't prove their nationality. It's a mess. As I said, there were almost 40 foreigners tribunals in Assam until 2015. In 2015, the government took a decision to kickstart the process and make it go faster. So they appointed another 64. So there are 100 tribunals, and they are the ones who are hearing a lot of the cases. And the functioning of these tribunals, who are like semi-courts, leaves a lot to be desired, because 4 years ago, in 2015, when the push came to the NRC process and the foreigners campaign, the government declared that any lawyer who was above 55 years of age and with 15 years of court experience could become a tribunal's judge. That means that people who were, as Mahatma Gandhi said, briefless lawyers, 10 years of experience, could do this job, which is supposed to be done by a retired judge. Most of the previous judges were retired judges. So what happened? In 1 year, 13,000 people were declared foreigners. In some cases, the percentage was 98%, even though the person who was complained against had all the documents. So this tells us one thing, that the history of the anti-migration movement, as well as this complexity, shows that promises of detection and deportation are easier said than done. And as I said to you, India and Bangladesh do not have a deportation agreement. And you hear often talk about pushback. You can push back people at the border. You cannot push them from within a country to the border and push them out, because there will be resistance from the country that does not accept them as their nationals. What happens to those people who are detected as foreigners? Let us say you have, hypothetically, suppose you have 2 lakhs. Bangladesh won't accept them. You try sending them to other states. Who will take them? I don't think anything is going to happen. Can you convert the state into a large open jail? which people keep talking about. There should be large detention centers, and I'm glad that the center has said there are no plans for creating such facilities. We need to see one thing, that the Assam Accord, I come back to this again, 85, what did it do? It said, this is an accord for the state. It is set in a particular period. It accepts a particular problem and it seeks to resolve that problem in a particular way. And this is where the CAB comes in. Although it fell through, and the current existing lame duck government and the party which is still in power says that it will bring it back. What did the CAB do, the Citizenship Amendment Bill? It changed the goalposts. From 1971, suddenly you have 2014, December, as the time until when 6 communities, religious communities, barring Muslims, will be accepted if they came illegally from Bangladesh or Pakistan or Afghanistan. Now, there was a joint parliamentary committee which went around the region and the country, because the problem of migration or illegal migration or foreigners is not just restricted to Assam and Bengal and the northeast. It is there in Rajasthan and Gujarat and so on the western side. The Joint Parliamentary Committee asked the Intelligence Bureau for a figure for immediate beneficiaries of the bill. The IB said there were 31,313 from the groups listed, staying on long-term visas after claiming religious persecution in 3 countries. But is it the centre's case that this little figure is the sum total of the number of people that it seeks to benefit? It doesn't seem to be so, because BJP leaders in Assam say lakhs of illegal migrants, Hindus, have settled since 1971. But there are no, as usual in many such cases, no hard figures, only estimates. That's why I think the effort. There was this statement by a group of retired officials who wrote to the Prime Minister about the NRC soon after that 40 lakh figure came out. And this is what they said: the large exclusion of names from the draft NRC is the outcome of a mix of procedural and capacity weaknesses of the NRC state coordinator and has been much reported about. The shortcomings include poor record management, technical glitches, and arbitrary physical verifications, among others. Central to the exclusion disproportionately of linguistic, religious, and gender minorities is the inbuilt discrimination in rules and procedures segregating communities in original and non-original inhabitants, and the use of different standards to verify claims in supporting documents for the 2 categories. Now, the Supreme Court has been issuing a set of ad hoc directions for this project, which is directly supervising, and it's been giving NRC organizers more and more time, and I think the final date is about July of this year, when we'll probably get some sort of a figure. But the CAB, and I'm looking at it now if you look at the constitutional aspect of it, the CAB, the Citizenship Amendment Bill, in my view, is unconstitutional for a very simple reason. It talks only about 6 groups, religious groups, leaving out the Muslim group. It makes citizenship contingent on religion. That is the problem. And these provisions appear contrary to Article 14, which guarantee equality before the law or equal protection of the law in any part of India. And I think this is why, often we say people don't understand complex issues. They do. They go to the heart of a problem. And that's why there's been such resistance, I think, in different parts of the region. As I said, this is a specific and unique accord, the Assam Accord. It's specific to a state. That's why it's called the Assam Accord. It's specific to a time. That's why it's 85. It defines a settlement, an issue to settle an issue which is swamped by discord. And it cannot be undone by legislation that seeks to supersede it. It is sanctioned by Parliament. It has support in the state across party lines. That's why the process of manufactured consent, which is so popular in our country, has met with such resistance. The goalposts have been changed without adequate dialogue. And lack of discussion and transparency are reasons why parts of our region of the Northeast erupt repeatedly. But Delhi does not seem to learn from the past. How could it expect the changing of political goalposts to be taken tacitly? So, constitutional rights must be upheld. Again, a bit of history. On the 15th of December 1946, there was a meeting between Gopinath Bordoloi, who was then the Premier of Assam. You had premiers in those days, not chief ministers. And his emissaries and Mahatma Gandhi. There was the time when Noakhali was erupting, there was deep suspicion and violence in the subcontinent. And the emissaries had a simple question for Mahatma Gandhi, which was just before the partition of India, there was the cabinet mission, which sought to basically divide India into majority pockets, sections, groups, and one group would draw up the constitution for the other because of majority. And in this case, Assam would have fallen under Bengal, which was then Muslim majority. And Gopinath Bordoloi said, what should we do? People are against this. So he says, if Assam keeps quiet, it is finished. No one can force Assam to do what it does not want to do. It must stand independently as an autonomous unit. Not today. What happens in the elections, I'm not sure. Over the past months, Assam has spoken. The people have spoken. But has Delhi listened? I don't think so. Is Delhi listening? Because the act of dialogue presupposes compromise by the other side, especially the most powerful. And anti-Delhi rage is not new. It's been part of the political landscape from pre-independence. Delhi often sees itself as an easy scapegoat to be blamed by one group or the other. But in this case, it seems to have misread the rule. A few days ago, a friend from Myanmar, from Burma, came to see me. I think I was telling Vikas about this just before the meeting. And he was talking about he works on the issues of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. There are 1.1 million people there who fled their country. Ethnic cleansing, pogroms, whatever you call it. Cramped into the refugee camps in the Chittagong area. So he says that one thing that people are forgetting, it's a great humanitarian crisis, all that. For the first time in the history of the Rohingyas, they are living together in one place as a people. Otherwise, they've been always scattered. He said, today, there are 18,000 madrasas. There are thousands of WhatsApp groups. people are disappearing, women are being trafficked, children are being trafficked. What happens is security is provided outside the camps. Nobody knows what happens inside the camps, especially at night. So we are closing our eyes to a great security challenge which nobody has taken on board, because this is a non-conventional threat to security. And radicalization can spread very rapidly, as we all know. It does not need training camps or anything else. All it needs is the acuteness of prejudice and the facility to connect to each other. So that's why I say that this is a situation that we need to observe and understand very, very closely, because in Assam we are having a situation of acute prejudice play out, and that is, to me, added to the reality of bad statistics, is a toxic mix. So what can be done? The Assam Accord, again we go back to the same two words, the Assam Accord. There was an innovation in that. Under the Assam Accord, 75,000 Bengali Hindus were disenfranchised, who had come illegally between 66 and 71. And then they were put back on the rolls after 10 years. Is this a possibility that can be done for a larger number of people without prejudice, without putting them at risk, without displacing them, and without violating constitutional guarantees, apart from the unwelcome attention it would certainly draw? The experience of Assam's tortuous immigration narrative shows that this is very challenging, in fact, highly unlikely. But let's look at the international concerns here. There is a clash with international principles of nationality and human rights. The government of India has still not revealed any clear, objective process, apart from the occasional statements which are thrown out from political platforms about the implementation of the NRC, or, if it comes again, the CAB. Nor has the government set out how it proposes to deal with the consequences of these decisions to comply with its own obligations and international standards. Because discrimination, statelessness and disenfranchisement would be in breach of India's international legal obligations. And I'll tell you which these obligations are. Under the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which India was one of actually the first signatories and actually helped design the critical elements on gender, I think education, and at least one or two other areas. Article 15 provides that no one can be arbitrarily deprived of their nationality. And even if you say that the Assam Accord says 71 is the cutoff, is it an arbitrary deprivation? Since many migrants who perhaps have been earning their livelihoods and raising families in Assam for decades find themselves at risk of being stateless. The Universal Declaration enjoins a duty on states to avoid actions that result in statelessness. And Article 2 of the UDHR prohibits racial and ethnic discrimination. The principle of non-discrimination, as well as the Universal Declaration, reflect customary international law under which no derogation is permitted. So any deprivation of nationality on the grounds of national origin or religion would be considered arbitrary. Then you have the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. India's obligations were mapped in a communication by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And it was signed by the Vice Chairman of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. So the obligations include, because it defines racial discrimination as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, ethnic, or national origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying and impairing the recognition, etc., of human rights and fundamental freedoms. There is Article 2, which obliges state parties to prohibit and eliminate any act or practice of racial discrimination. There's the right to nationality, which says that the deprivation of citizenship on the basis of race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin violates obligations to ensure non-discriminatory enjoyment of the right to nationality. And there are a whole bunch of others, including the reference to the UN General Assembly's Declaration on the Elimination of Intolerance of All Forms of Discrimination. The rights, the protection of the rights of persons belonging to minorities. And this was ratified by India in exactly 40 years ago, 1979 April. So there is another one which in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which prohibits any discrimination between citizens and aliens on any grounds whatsoever. And under Article 7 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, India is obligated to prevent statelessness from being inherited. And a child is entitled to a nationality irrespective of the nationality or other status of his or her parents. I've already indicated how it's in violative of Article 14 of the Constitution. And to me, whatever government is in power, whichever is political creed, I believe it must answer to the concept and implementation of justice. Are we building a better, more equal, equitable, a more inclusive and just society by what we say and do and seek to do, not just by what we say and harangue others to do? Are we doing it by our work and decisions? For all of us, duty holders, stakeholders, citizens, and constitutional patriots, as Ramchandra Guha, Bangalore's favorite son, or one of his favorite sons would say, constitutional patriots, our life and work must be defined by that great pillar of the Constitution, Article 21, which says that no person shall be deprived of his life or liberty, of their life or liberty without due process of law. It does not say citizen. It says no person. So humanity and human rights are greater than citizenship of a country. So I think it's time to read the warning signs and reach out to calm the waters. The government of India needs to heed what exists as robust opposition on this issue instead of heading for a confrontation that could harm all sides. There is enough ill will on this and many other issues in the region, in our country. It's time to breathe some goodwill and share it. Thank you. Shall we take the
Hello. It's for a clarification. I mean, what is the rationale for barring a particular community and allowing other communities in this particular CAB? What is the rationale that they are putting?
The rationale is these are minority groups, religious groups who are facing threat and persecution in their own countries. They should be allowed to come to their motherland, to the homeland, which is the home of all Hindus and minority groups. It's not obviously home to others. But that runs into a stumbling block. I was recently in Bangladesh for a few meetings, and the people said that we have, okay, the numbers of Hindus have gone down in Bangladesh, but we still have something like 10 million Hindus. Do you want all of them to go? Is that what the government of India wants? I mean, you are welcoming those who went illegally, but you are not welcoming those who also perhaps may have gone illegally from another religion. You know? And in Assam, the anger was really directed at that. You cannot discriminate on the basis of religion as far as illegal migration is concerned. But again, the narrative was divided in different parts of Assam. In the Brahmaputra Valley, it was on that, as I've described it. In the Barak Valley, where there are many Hindu migrants who have settled, it was very much pro the CAB. So there is a division.
I just heard you say that you don't see an impact in the upcoming elections because of we have seen a lot of protests against this. I thought you said you don't see that it'll impact.
No, I think I said that I don't know what impact it's going to have on the elections because people are confused by what different parties are doing. First, the BJP pushed it, and then it realized it was going to lose because its own ally, the JDU, announced it would oppose it in the Rajya Sabha, and they didn't have the numbers. Then the AJP, which is its ally in Assam and at the center, walked out of the coalition. Now it's walked back in. So people are a bit confused. So this might, it confuses the narrative, and clarity is not there.
Yeah, actually, just to add to what Manoj asked, I think, I'm also in Bangalore, but what I have read or what I have heard from my friends in Assam, initially when CAB was initiated in Assam, and lots of protests and from all kinds of groups, including SGP, and I think that that time BJP was really on backfire, and the Chief Minister Sarvanda he was undecisive what to say. So he was saying different things in different platforms. But after a few days, I think just 2 to 3 weeks before election, they had regained one very interesting narrative. And I think that people are buying that yes, we are talking about bringing or giving citizenship to Bangladeshi Hindus, but Congress did to Bangladeshi Muslims, and they will continue to do, and soon Hindus will become minorities in Northeast or in Assam. I think as soon as BJP started that narrative, entire protest, and I would like to know your version, what you are getting from the ground, entire protest was somehow subdued, and somehow that narrative is getting traction. So I would like to know that. And also, Sanjay, this is not a query. If you can add that, one is that CAB seems to be unconstitutional, of course, but there's another kind of narrative, and the case is still going on in Supreme Court that 1971 in Assam Accord itself is unconstitutional, because you can't have 2 dates for citizens in one country. And then Mizoram one, and they have filed a case, and I don't know at what stage that case is. And so in these 2 points, if you want to add something.
Well, on the first thing, I think that particular narrative about the Hindus being in threat and possibly the numbers of Hindus who would come in would support the BJP. I don't know how that would really work out, because the fact is that Assam is a very it's not dominated. It's a place of large minorities. You don't have great majorities. Even in a district, you will have minorities everywhere. Everybody is a minority in Assam. And it doesn't work as simply as that. So I would be surprised if this particular narrative gets purchased everywhere outside of perhaps the Barak Valley. In Assam, it's a bit more complicated than the Brahmaputra Valley is a bit more complex than that, because there are large tribal groups and others who see this, and in other states of the Northeast who see this as a real challenge. That if Hindu populations grow in Christian communities, it would pose a certain challenge. And I think this is a real concern both in Meghalaya and in places like Nagaland and so on. As far as the Supreme Court's hearing of this, I have not followed in terms of at what stage the case is. But it raises a fundamental question of how do you deal with a critical issue that has come up. Do you stick to the old ways? Do you try and take some initiatives which are unique and actually calm the issue? Because 1947 there was one country and Pakistan was one country with 2 units. In 1971 you had 3 countries. India was the partition, Pakistan was partitioned, frankly. So it was a completely different situation. So I wonder what the Supreme Court would say, whoever the Chief Justice is whenever it comes out. But I think it would, they would have to take a decision on the basis of history and of law, because the entire world of the region changed in that one year.
Sir, I read in an article that in Assam, increasingly detention camps and detention facilities are rapidly expanding. So, I want to know, what are the implications of such an expansion?
Well, I think what's happening is that I don't think the detention camps are expanding. I think there are more people who are being placed in camps rather than the camps, because the camps are not separate to the prisons. They're in a separate part of the prison, of whether it's Tezpur or Jorhat or any of these other places. Until about last year, sometime about September, I think, women and children were kept in one detention center and men were kept in another. Families are divided from each other. Where in the world do you have this? It is so unjust. It should make us weep at the state of justice in our country. The Justice Lokur said the families have to be united. You can keep them in a detention camp, but think of it. Some people have been in detention camps for 20 years and their family members are free. Only that one person of a family of 8 or 9 is in the detention camp. So he's a foreigner and the others are not. This sort of thing makes no sense to me. And nobody's challenging it as strongly as it should be. To me, that is one of the, more painful things. And I think I would urge you to read some of the articles by Tora Agarwala in the Indian Express, who is a very fine wordsmith and has written very extensively on these issues. See, there's also this other thing which has come up in the past year about Rohingyas who are being deported to Myanmar, to Burma. They're small numbers of people. But what many people don't realize is these people have been in jail well beyond the time that they should have served. They've been in jail, some of these people, for 6 to 8 years. And they want to get out. Because they were arrested. India is one of the few countries where illegal entry means you spend time in jail. Usually it's a bailable offense. And they're in jail for 5-6 years. They were asked, do you want to go home? So they said, yes, we want to go home. They were not briefed about conditions in the Arakan, in the Rakhine. So you're sending people to a situation of great potential harm to themselves without even giving them the information that could protect them from possible harm. Those are other challenging situations which we all have to know about, even if we can't do anything about them ourselves.
Manoj's question. You mentioned the confusion among the voters. Sorry to bring it back to you gave us a longue durée picture and we are focusing on the immediate election consequences, which is not exactly the best way to probe this matter, but it's on everyone's minds, and we know that Assam Gana Parishad itself was split. Prafulla Mohanty said he would not go along with the decision to go back to the coalition. So there is all this, but since we saw such massive protests, a decision of the political party to stay in coalition or out can't possibly direct such a large outburst into either quiescence or. I'm just wondering, on the ground, do you have a sense for what may be happening? Because
my sense is that the public anger on the CAB is not going to be necessarily muted, but whether it turns into a vote against an individual or the party is something that I'm not sure about. I do think that the AGP is actually going to suffer for its the way it's jumped ship and then jumped back again, obviously to remain in power or be part of the process that can influence decision making. And that's what's going to confuse people about who to vote for in some of the areas where the AGP has a secular vote. It has a very strong grounding in tribal, Muslim, minority. It has that support for many years. So it's moving away from that. And I think that is a matter of concern.
You mentioned that the Assam Accord did insist that those who came after the Bangladeshi war had to be deported, although you say there's no sense of where they will be deported. What will happen to that demand? This is trying to recalibrate that on religious lines as well as on temporal lines. Just the last, fewer time span.
Well, if we just look at more recent time, in 2014 we were told then when a particular party came to power, the Bangladeshis would have to pack bag and baggage and leave home and go back. Well, now you're welcoming more illegals. You're not sending out any illegals. There's a bit of a confusion there as far as changing goalposts are concerned. But I'm sorry.
The question was, for those of us who may even feel the 1971 date as a cutoff date may not be, a just thing to push for, although at that time it seemed like a compromise to settle for. In hindsight, even that seems unfair to those, who may have come out of desperation.
I personally think that you can't really enforce a process of sealing the borders and saying that you want good neighbors. You can't build a fence and say that, okay, on the western side you have somebody who's really interested in destroying your systems, and The people are not, the government is, and we need to make the difference. And as far as Bangladesh is concerned, in 1985, I remember this, when India announced it was going to build a fence, the president of Bangladesh was a man called Arshad, General Arshad. He said this is an hostile act to a poor neighbor. Now we may agree or disagree with the fact that people do come, perhaps in limited numbers, to find work and succor and livelihoods in this country from other countries, including Bangladesh. But those issues are not just political issues, they're economic issues. I mean, one of the great economists of our time, Rahman Sowan, the Bangladeshi, one of the founders of Bangladesh, says that he says, Sanjoy, I agree with you. He gave a public lecture in Tezpur. I had invited him to give to the Northeast Scholars International Conference. And he says, till the 80s, I would say, even till the early 90s, there was a labor flow. But today, Bangladesh is a different country. It has among the fastest growing economies in this part of the world. More women are empowered than ever before. There are more girl children in school than India has. Its health indices are far better than any country in South Asia except Sri Lanka. So the narrative is changing in other countries. Ours has remained the same. And that's where we need to challenge ourselves, is other countries are actually moving in different directions. By choosing to believe in this narrative, we are basically going to stay stuck in the past, encourage violence, hatred, suspicion, and all the things that create ill will. That's why I'm saying that there's so little goodwill in our world. Let's try and build better trust that leads to goodwill.
Actually, I was arguing in that line itself. I mean, is there even space for asking that to be reconsidered? In the sense, sending back as something that we should not think about. Right now, sending back is being fought on grounds of identity, on grounds of time.
No, but even as a process of law, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're stuck with the problem. You have to decide how you deal with it.
Yeah. So is there a
so the solution is, I think, you can disenfranchise people and you can put them back on the rolls. It's been done before. I'm not saying there is a precedent, a small precedent, arguably, but it's there within the Assam Accord, and it's not rocket science. And many of these people are very productive, whether they're illegal or whatever it is. They're productive members of society. It's not as they're sitting around, eating off somebody else's plate, as has been said.
Sanjay, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly. What I meant was, is there space for not even raising this question, of saying, forget about sending them back, even by the terms of the Assam Accord?
I don't think you can get away from that. I think you would still have to. We have, like, when I negotiate, have conversations with people at the UN, the UNHRC and so on, I say to them, you have to recognize there's a problem of illegal migration. We cannot walk away from that. There are possibly anything between 8 lakhs to 1 million people, or perhaps more, who've come illegally in 48 years. There are not millions of people surging across the border. But you have to accept that this is a reality. There is another reality, which is that no Indian should be discriminated against on the grounds of, whether it's skin color or appearance or religion or language. And if through this process an Indian is harmed, then the whole process is called into question, in my view. So that's basically what I want to say. Okay.
Close the session. Thanks a lot to the.
I think the fear among indigenous Assamese groups are that I mean, forget about legal or illegal migrants. I mean, those who are not from indigenous Assamese origin, perhaps they will take away our political rights and also. I think, I mean, nowadays hardly anyone is talking about it. Assam Accord had one provision on that constitutional safeguards to indigenous Assamese groups.
No, but that was never defined.
So there were, one is that was never defined who is an indigenous Assamese, and I think again one committee has been formed and so on and so forth.
Well, the committee, I've been on several government committees, I know what happened.
So
I was on the Armed Forces Special Powers Review Committee, and we all know where that is now.
But my point is that you can perhaps comment on that provision and on this issue, what Chandan is
See, I think that sometimes, I mean, at one time I took a position, I have not revisited that thought, I will hopefully in the next days. Should there be reservation, constitutional protection in perpetuity? Whatever the numbers of people become, that this core group, which is right now 64%, is assured a constitutional protection in perpetuity and a majority of the seats. Can you say that? They quote indigenous Assamese, I mean the indigenous people of Assam, Boros, Kilonjias, you know, whoever has come in this period should be given, say, 55% of the assembly seats, and that be held in perpetuity. Now you'll be one will have to rewrite the constitution for that, because is that possible? I mean, we have to look at newer ways of dealing with this problem, and it's a question that you know, I don't think any of us have the answers to. All I'm trying to say is that this needs much deeper focus, understanding, and dialogue. The problem is there is no dialogue. People are only shouting and speaking to each other as they do on the talk shows. So without dialogue and mediation, you can have mediation on Ayodhya. Can you have mediation on this? Can you have focused constitutional dialogue on this? Venkat, can I please? Sorry. Thank you. So I think that is something that and that should grow out of universities. I really do believe this. Many of us have said whatever we want to do. Sometimes we say new things, but new thought, new thinking must be given, more greater reflectiveness must be given from within areas where this thinking can come from, and that is from the university. I really believe that. What's the constitutional thing to do? What's the right thing to do? What's constitutional? Is it right? May not be sometimes. Like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the Supreme Court in 1997, it's constitutionally, it's, it upheld its constitutionality. But it does not make it just. There must be a sense and a fierce undergirding of justice in whatever we seek to do in this issue.
In this, I'd like to say that some of the northeastern states, a certain number of seats have been fixed in perpetuity for the tribal communities.
Yeah.
So this is true for Nagaland, 59 out of 60, Tripura, Sikkim, etc. So it could be done in case of Assam as well.
Yeah, but it can't be arbitrarily done. It has to be done through a process of very detailed dialogue. Otherwise, you'll have the kind of problems that you're having with the CAB and all that.
Right. See, in those cases, they said on the day the parliament approved
it comes into.
The number of people who are from the tribal community in the Vidhan Sabha, those many seats are going to be reserved. Now, in this regard, I wanted to ask something that, they, for past 5-6 years at least, BJP has been suggesting that it's going to give tribal status to a few communities, and that in turn is going to protect their, their land rights, etc. Do you think it might be a solution to some of the questions which are engaging us today?
I think it will work to a degree because land is the issue that is dividing everyone. It's on the, even the issues of states and borders, communities and land. I mean, everything in that region, if not in other parts of the country, comes back to the question of land and mati and control of that. And I think, again, this is a process of which need acute dialogue, and involving people at the ground level. For many years, the peace between Nagaland and Assam on the border held because of communities who were making the peace. I mean, you've done work on this yourself. But when the states intervene, things get demolished. So, who builds the trust? How do you build it? How do you create the dialogue so that everybody has a buy-in? Everybody is not going to win. It's not going to be win-win. It's going to win some, lose some. And that is how I think we have to negotiate this.
Just one quick question. Sorry if we...
No.
You mentioned that what's happening, the Citizenship Amendment Act was a violation of so many of the international agreements India has been a signatory to.
Yeah.
So once this is recognized, what has been the response of the authorities that are enforcing those things? I mean...
You mean in terms of the government, from the government?
Yes, has the government...
The government doesn't respond to any of this. The government does not respond. That's part of the problem. He just sees this as a criticism of India's democratic and traditions and all that. Even it doesn't say that often.
But there's no concerted pressure building from global circles.
I mean, it just stays silent. It doesn't respond. And that's one way of strategizing the dealing with this issue. I mean, all these years at the Human Rights Council, I mean, Venkat and Venu can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the government has rarely responded to some of the very sharp criticisms that have come up in a technical manner. If Pakistan says something, they'll react. But
anyone else would like to ask?
That's 3:30.
So we are more than 3:30 now. So thank you very much for the...
Thank you for having me.